Okay, and just before we begin, the University of Alberta would like to acknowledge that we are located on Treaty 6 territory and respects the history, language, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. So this is just the overview of what we'll go through today. I'll give a little introduction of WICRI and our speakers, and then we'll dive into looking at what is grad school. So we'll cover things like how to choose a program, how to find a supervisor, talk about funding, and when and how you should apply. And then we'll switch gears a little bit and talk about the kinds of research that you can do. So we'll talk about the CIHR Pillars of Health Research, as well as the different paths you can take within your graduate program. So then we'll go to our panel discussion with our wonderful panel of graduate students and finish off with a research blitz where we'll have a University of Alberta prof come in and pitch a position they have in their lab. And after the session, we'll also be sending out a list of current open positions across different WICRI labs. So my name is Adrian, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Medical Genetics. And our other speaker today is Holly, who's a PhD student in the School of Public Health. So together, we're members of TAC, or the Training Advisor Committee, under WICRI. So for those of you that don't know, WICRI stands for Women and Children's Health Research Institute. So they're a really unique organization in Canada that support both women and children's health research. So they provide support to researchers, as well as different networking and learning opportunities like the one that we're holding today. So WICRI is funded by the Stollery Children's Hospital Foundation and the Alberta Women's Health Foundation. So again, our goal of the workshop today is to really help you gain a better understanding of grad school that'll hopefully give you tools to help with future planning, as well as to maybe give you information and get you excited about maybe pursuing a career in health-related research. So with that, I'll pass to Holly, who will talk about what is grad school.
Thanks, Adrian. So as Adrian mentioned, my name is Holly Mathias. I'm a second-year PhD student in the School of Public Health and also a trainee with the Inner City Health and Wellness program. And I'm really excited to talk to folks today about what is grad school, including how we look for funding, how you find a supervisor, how to even apply for grad school. And this is a really important topic for me because I'm the first person in my family to have attended grad school. And I know when I was thinking about grad school as an undergrad student, I had so many questions. And a lot of what I found out was by going through trial and error. And I really wish I had someone to help me and kind of guide me along the way. So I hope that you will feel comfortable asking questions throughout the presentation. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will be kind of monitoring them as things go on during this presentation. And I don't mind pausing to make things a little bit clearer or to give you some more information. So I think I will have to get Adrian to move the slides for me. So next slide, please. So what is grad school? So grad school can cover many different programs, and typically it's a type of school scholarly program that you would go to after undergrad. And so it can include many different types of programs, so things like med school, law school. But for the purposes of this presentation today, we're going to be talking about research-intensive programs. So things that are like master's programs, like Masters of Science, Masters of Arts, and PhD programs. And so these are courses or programs that have a very strong research component. They might be writing a thesis or writing dissertations, or perhaps there's sort of a capstone project focused on research as part of this degree. And I think one of the most important parts about grad school is that it moves beyond just sharing knowledge, whereas sometimes as an undergrad student, we're expected to memorize and kind of learn what other people know or what other people have researched. And as a grad student, you're now expected to develop your own knowledge and help to expand the field that you're studying in. Next slide, please. And so if you're sitting here today and you're still kind of on the fence about whether or not you might be interested in going to grad school, here are just a few of the reasons why you might be interested in attending. Perhaps you're someone that really wants to explore a topic in depth. There's something that you learned about during undergrad that you thought was really, really cool. And so you want to know a little bit more about it. Perhaps you want to develop research skills, and perhaps you're not even thinking about a research kind of career afterwards, but you think the skills are really helpful, such as being able to critically think about knowledge, being able to communicate clearly. Those are all very important skills that can be applied quite broadly. Perhaps you want to pursue a passion. Perhaps there's a field that you're really, really passionate about and that you want to just learn more and be in that experience. Sometimes it can be about career opportunities, so thinking ahead about what you might want to do. Sometimes some careers do require more than just an undergrad degree. Perhaps you want to make connections with other people who are like-minded, other students, or even faculty or professionals who have a similar interest to you. There can be lots of travel opportunities if you enjoy maybe even living in a different city for school, or even just traveling for conferences. That was something I didn't know about as an undergrad, and I've had the opportunity to go to some really cool places. And also, just if you're a curious person and you love learning, then perhaps grad school is a place for you. Next slide. So we're going to be talking about some steps for applying to grad school. So I'm going to be talking about choosing a program, finding a supervisor, applying for funding, and applying to the specific program. And I do want to note that sometimes these things can be interchanged. So I'm just going to talk about them in this order, but sometimes you might apply for funding first because there's a really great opportunity that comes around and you can kind of take that funding to other schools. Perhaps there's some programs where you apply to the program and they match you with a supervisor themselves. So I just want to talk and kind of put a note out there that this kind of timeline might not be everyone's experience, but that's what we're going to talk about today. Next slide, please. So choosing a program, there are a lot of different reasons why it's important to think quite critically when you're thinking about choosing a program. So for example, if you're interested in biology, or for myself, it's public health, each public health program or program in your field tends to have something that makes it slightly different than the others. So perhaps there's different areas of expertise specific to your topic that different programs have. There might be different experts in the field at different universities or in different programs. Or perhaps you choose a program that gives you an opportunity to work with a specific community or issue. So for example, if there is an issue that's very specific to Alberta, perhaps you want to be going to a school in Alberta to look at that issue more in depth. Next program, or next slide, please. And so I just wanted to provide some tips for people who are thinking about how to choose a program. So there are a number of things that you can do. And again, these are not in any order. You can kind of pick and choose what might work for you. But there are a number of things you can do to help you narrow down what programs might be right for you. Some things that have helped me have been contacting current and past students. So if you know students who are currently in the program, or sometimes you might be able to find a list of alumni through LinkedIn, or sometimes they're featured on a program webpage. Most times students are very happy to talk to you about what that program was like for them and their experience. Something else I found helpful has been looking up faculty members from the department and reading the type of research they put out or the type of papers. That will give you an idea of their area of interest and the type of research that is going on in that program. Perhaps it's looking at program requirements. So maybe a program requires a certain GPA, or for you to take a certain number of courses as a prerequisite. If you don't meet all that, perhaps that's not the program for you. And so perhaps you need to look for a different type of program. You might also want to think about the university or institution that is in that program is kind of situated in, and think about the types of funding opportunities that are offered, the types of health support. So will you have access to maybe a student health clinic? If you really like going to the gym, is there a student gym? Is there good, I guess, like transit around the university for you to get to? Those are all things that you might want to consider. Same with program locations. So if you are really used to being in kind of a smaller community, perhaps you don't want to go to a big city, or vice versa. And also modes of delivery. Sometimes some programs are hybrid, online, in person, and I think COVID has definitely changed things. So that's definitely something to think about. You might also want to think about your ultimate end goal. So what you would picture yourself doing at the end of this degree or eventually into your career. And I would recommend visiting your current university's career center, because they can help you sort through some of these things and give you some more options or paths that you might want to take. Next slide. So a question that some people had submitted when you, at the time of registration, has been finding a supervisor. And that's definitely a really big question. And it's one of the most, I would say, important parts of the grad school experience, because the supervisor relationship is so important. Not only are they going to be guiding your research, but they are often a very good resource for networking with other faculty or other just employers in the community. They tend to have a good pulse on things in the field. They tend to be good references when you try to apply for jobs or other programs. And it's really important that you just have a good supervisor who can support you. And I do want to point out that it's not always about working with the most well-known or popular professor in your field. Sometimes it's about how well you will work together. So perhaps there are certain big names in your field that you think might be good supervisors, but I would encourage you to think very broadly about the type of support you need and how that might work with the type of supervisor you want. So for example, sometimes I have seen that some professors who are really well known are often really busy doing lots of other things, media requests, advocacy work, going out in the community, really focused on research. And so if you're someone who is really new to research and you need more time mentoring, being mentored and things like that, then perhaps you want to think about just the time commitment that some supervisors will have, because every supervisor works differently. Next slide, please. And so here are some ideas for finding a supervisor. You might want to review the program website for a faculty member. So if you have an idea of the type of program you want to go into, feel free to browse who works in the program. And sometimes they will also just have a note at the end of each kind of faculty bio page, and it will say like looking for graduate students, and they might even give you examples of the research they do. They'll also have sometimes it will be advertised on the program, and sometimes it will also have their contact information. So it's a good way of finding them. Also going to put a shameless plug out there for the Wickery Find a Researcher tool. This is a really great tool if you want to try to find supervisors who are very specific to women and children's health research. Another thing that I've done in the past is I've read papers by potential supervisors and their students to kind of figure out what work's being done and if I think my skill set and their skill set would work well together. You can contact current or past students of that supervisor about their experiences. And another really good option is to consider doing a summer studentship or other sort of research assistant opportunity within the lab. And if you're not sure if a supervisor has an opportunity, you can always reach out and just inquire. And most times faculty members are very happy to let you know if they have any sort of openings coming up. Next slide, please. And so how do you contact a supervisor? I know for me as an undergrad student, this was a really, really scary part. And I left it to very last minute because I was really scared about doing it. But I think it sounds daunting, but you can do it. The very most important piece is to make sure that you are making a good first impression. So try to be a little bit formal in how you're addressing the person, like dear professor or dear Dr. So-and-so. This sounds very silly, but have been times where I've heard people have received emails that says, yo, first name, or like just very casual. And that doesn't always give a great first impression of who you are as a person. Be personable and keep it short. So you don't need to send paragraphs and paragraphs about yourself, but you should give a little bit of information about who you are so they know that you are seriously considering working with them. So some ideas about what you might want to include would be things like your name, your current program, maybe a sentence or two about why you're interested in working with them. So maybe they're working on a topic that you really think is interesting, or they're using certain research methods that you want to learn more about. If you can give a brief summary of your past research experience or a topic of interest, so maybe you can say you did a couple of research, you took a research course and you did something for your honors, that's helpful for them to know. And I would also consider attaching your CV or your transcripts just so they can have an idea of who you are, and that way you don't need to type pages and pages of information. And probably the second most important piece is don't be afraid to follow up. Faculty members and professors get so many emails, and I know that it can be really scary when you email someone and you don't hear back. But trust me when I say that their inbox fills up so quickly, and they are definitely not ignoring you because they want to ignore you. They most likely their email just got lost. And so I would say that, if you haven't heard back from them in about 2 weeks, feel free to follow up with them. This is why it's a good idea to start contacting people early so that you're not contacting them the week before a deadline to apply for something. But feel free to follow up and just kindly say, hi, I'm following up on this last email. And most times they will have completely not seen the email and they'll be really happy that you followed up with them. Next slide. So probably the other most important part of grad school is funding. And this is so critical because you need it to cover tuition, fees, books and supplies, living expenses. And something that I had not realized when I applied to grad school is that usually you also have to pay for a spring and summer semester. Even if you're not necessarily in courses over the spring and summer, there's what's called a program fee that keeps you enrolled full time. And usually this is a little bit cheaper, this part of the tuition compared to fall or winter, but it is something that I did not consider. And so this is why it's really, really important to be able to have funding. Next slide. And there are many different ways that you can find funding for your program. One option would be, and I've divided it up here in kind of categories. One option would be looking at what you can do yourself to fund grad school. So this might be something like using personal savings for living expenses or fees. So maybe you've worked in the past, you saved up some money, you're going to pay rent out of that. Some people will also go through student loans. Your program might be a source of funding. So oftentimes programs will give you entrance scholarships or bursaries, and many programs also have a minimum kind of funding package. So if you apply to a master's or a PhD program, the program will provide you automatically with, let's say, $20,000, but that can be comprised of a few different things. It might be $10,000 in scholarships, and then you might have to work for the other 10,000, like as a research assistant or a teaching assistant, excuse me. But usually there's something that might come from the program that you don't even have to apply for. It's just automatic when you are accepted into the program. And that's something that you might want to have a conversation with a potential supervisor about what types of funding they might have available. And the other type of funding is from your program is a conference travel grant. So if you're in a program, oftentimes you'll have the opportunity to go travel and present your research. And oftentimes I know the student union and the university, and usually some programs as well, will give some funds to students to cover some travel expenses. So you might not be getting an all-inclusive trip to a tropical destination, but sometimes your program will chip in maybe $250 or $500 to help go towards some travel fees. And this is really helpful. There are also many different other scholarships that you can apply for. Some of them are through the University of Alberta or your institution or university. Some are through provincial organizations like Alberta Patient-Oriented Research or the SPORE unit. The federal government provides scholarships, and these are quite common through Tri-Council, so through CIHR, SSHRC, and NSERC. Adrian will be talking about CIHR and some of the pillars of research that you might be interested in doing. And then alumni associations and other foundations, and sometimes industry will also have pots of funding. And I, again, want to shamelessly plug that WICRI does also provide funding for graduate students. And so that is something that you might want to look into if you're interested in going into grad school. Next slide. So a few funding tips. I recommend, and I do this, I keep a spreadsheet of opportunities. Even if the deadline's passed, I'll put it into my spreadsheet and then I'll kind of check it every couple of months. So maybe I missed a deadline this fall, but I'll write it down so I know next fall to apply for it. I also really recommend applying for small awards. They really add up. A lot of people don't apply for the tiny awards, like the $1,000 or $2,000 awards. They'll try to go for the bigger, like $20,000, $30,000. And every award you get, you can put on your CV. So even if it's $500, $1,000, and you put it on your CV, it will really build it up and show that you are able to get those funds, and that can help you eventually get some of those bigger scholarships. The other thing I want to say is that once you apply for one award, it does get easier. So once you have practice writing a summary about your research or maybe a personal statement, it gets way easier to write about funding. Just go back, please. There we go. The other thing is that you do want to check for requirements and ask for references early so that your references can get their letters in. And it can also be helpful to ask past award winners if you can look at their applications or ask them questions. And most people are very happy to help you with that. Next slide. And so finally, in terms of application timeline, it does vary by program and department. Typically, applications will open in the fall and close in early winter. Although the University of Alberta does say that some programs have applications that are open all year round. So it's really important to check by program or department when you are considering applying. As I said, some programs have rolling admissions, and this can also change based on country of residence. It's also never too early to contact a potential supervisor. Some programs do require that you identify a supervisor at the time of application, and this can also help when you're wanting to apply for funding, because if a supervisor or faculty member knows that you might be interested in coming to their lab to do graduate research work, they can help you kind of narrow down what sort of funding opportunities might be available. Next slide. And so a couple of tips just around applications. Carefully review all the requirements because it does vary by program, and anticipate spending more time than you think you need on applications. I know when I first applied for master's programs, I didn't realize that I had to order official transcripts and then get them couriered all around to the different schools I wanted to go to. And so that can be expensive, first of all. But if you leave it to the last minute, it can be really hard to get transcripts sent from maybe one end of the country to the other. There can also be a lot of tech issues if you have to submit through a portal. So I always try to submit a few days early. And so requirements do differ when you're applying, but typically an application will require you to submit a personal statement or a description of your proposed research, a CV, transcripts, reference letters. Some programs ask for writing samples, so like an old paper that you might have written for a different course. Some programs will need you to submit GRE scores or kind of standardized test scores. And what I also forgot about was the application fee. And that was a surprise for me when I realized that it was like $100 to apply every time I wanted to apply for grad school. And so some people have asked, what about GPA? So what GPA do I need to get into a certain program? And I don't have the answer for that because it does vary by program. What I can say is that if you are interested in a program, it helps to go on their website to see. Typically, you need, I would say most programs look for at least a 3.5, 3.7, but it does help to email the program if you have any questions or concerns, because they can kind of tell you what exactly they're looking for. Next slide. And so I'm going to leave you with a few additional resources. These are resources at the University of Alberta that can help you. The first is the Academic Success Center, and they are really great if you are writing your personal statement for an application or application for grants or scholarships. They can help read it over and give you some constructive comments about how to write and strengthen your writing. I didn't know they offered this service, and I went once for a scholarship application and they helped me so much, and I ended up getting that scholarship. So I can't say enough good things about that service. The other is the Career Center. So they can help you working on your CV, thinking about career goals and next steps, and also about guiding you if grad school is the right path for you. And then finally, the Faculty of Graduate Studies and Research, FGSR, they are great. They have a great list of funding sources that you can apply for. And they also tell you kind of like the formats for applications. So what font size should you use when you're writing your personal statement? Those sort of things that kind of help with formatting your application. All right. And I will pass it off to Adrian.
All right, thanks, Holly. That was awesome. And again, if you guys have any questions throughout, feel free to put them in the chat, or you can save them to the end. So now we're going to get into what kind of research is out there for you to do. So I'm just going to start by going over the 4 CIHR pillars of health research. Because when I first started grad school, I didn't really appreciate all these different types of research that actually fall under health research in Canada. So CIHR has four main pillars: biomedical, clinical, health services, and social, cultural, environmental, and population health research. So we'll go through what each of these types of research are, as well as some examples either from Canada or from the U of A. So the biomedical pillar is fundamental or basic research. So basic here doesn't mean simple, but it really focuses on understanding those basic underlying mechanisms of health and disease. There's also applied research in the biomedical pillar. So this uses that knowledge from the fundamental research in order to make new medications and therapies. So Canada has made a lot of really great discoveries under this biomedical pillar, which include things like the discovery and use of insulin, the invention of the cardiac pacemaker, and discovery and transplantation of stem cells. A more recent example of biomedical research from the U of A is work from Dr. Dakota in the Department of Medical Genetics. So what he's done is he's been able to generate a gene therapy for the treatment of Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So this work started in mice and has now progressed to clinical trials. So that's the kind of research that can be done under this pillar. So that leads well into the second pillar, which is clinical research. So this kind of research aims to improve prevention, diagnosis, and treatments of different diseases and illnesses. So again, there's kind of two main streams of pillar two. There are observational studies where you take a population of people and collect data regarding their habits and health behaviors. Then there's clinical trials where you take what you learn from biomedical research and then you test new treatments or inventions. So clinical research really relies on the help of volunteers that we can use to test different things. So it can lead to new and improved medications, vaccines, therapies, and treatments. So one example that's near and dear to me is work by Dr. Frida Miller at the University of Toronto and UBC. So what she's done is she's taken a drug that was previously used for diabetes and has repurposed it for use in children with cancer that have undergone brain radiation. And so that's currently in clinical trials. Clinical research can also help improve different medical tools, equipment, and devices. So one really cool example of this from the U of A is work from Dr. Germenko at the Department of Radiology and Diagnostic Imaging. So what he does is he uses AI to improve medical imaging diagnostics. So he feeds the AI different CT images and MRI images and gets it to make diagnoses based on what the images are. So that's another really cool way that clinical research is pushing forward. So pillar three is health services research. So pillar three studies how healthcare services are organized, supported, and delivered across Canada with the goal to enhance patient care, reduce overall costs, and address the needs of both healthcare providers as well as patients. So I have a few really great examples of this from the U of A. So the first that I want to talk about is work by Dr. Schultz and Dr. Flood in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. So what they're doing is they're investigating the barriers within our health system and how this affects the treatment of Albertans who are transgender. So they're looking at identifying these barriers that cause these barriers and how we can help remove them to improve health services for this population. Another group that's doing this at the U of A is the Zegenbaum Lab at the Department of Pediatrics. So similarly, they're looking at what's causing this major lack of services for Indigenous people with autism and how we can implement services to, again, improve their health service access. So the fourth pillar is quite broad. It's social, cultural, environmental, and population health research. So this looks at how all these different factors, social factors, cultural, environmental, occupational, and economic, affect our health on a population level. So I have a few examples of this type of work at the U of A. So the first is work by Dr. Hicks in the Department of Pediatrics. So what she's doing is looking at how different environmental factors like cigarette smoke and air quality and home life affect children's development and how genes are expressed over the course of development. So another very different example from the U of A is work by Dr. Story in the School of Public Health. So one of the things that she's looking at is understanding how mentorship and after-school programs can really support the health and well-being of Indigenous youth. So again, very different types of projects, but they both fall within this pillar 4. Okay, so now that I've kind of gone over all these different types of research they can do in health research, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the specific programs or paths you can take within a master's or PhD. So I'm just going to give a very high-level overview, but if any of these types of things interest you, I'd really encourage you to check out these websites and resources. So I'll talk a little bit about the master's versus PhD program. I'll talk about the types of contracts you can have in these graduate programs, internships. I'll talk about the match programs. This is a rotating program where you try different labs before settling in one to your master's. Talk a little bit about MD, PhD, and finish with talking about a few different exchange programs. So I know Holly covered this a little bit, but you typically do a master's or a PhD, although you can do a master's first and follow up with a PhD. So a master's degree is typically 2 to 3 years, although this varies by program. It can be course-based professional, but today we're mostly focused on thesis or research-based programs. And at the end of a master's degree, you'll have to write a thesis and then defend it. So a PhD is typically a little bit longer. So these are thesis-based, and they also require a defense of your thesis at the end. But about the midpoint, you also have to have a thesis proposal that is accepted, as well as pass a candidacy exam, which is a basic knowledge exam. So like I said, you can complete a master's degree and then pursue a PhD, or you can start a master's and transfer to a PhD about a year 2 or 3. This is a way to kind of fast track your way to a doctorate degree. So within a PhD or master's, you can have a few different types of contracts. So your GRAF is typically the contract that will describe all the research activities that you're responsible for in your graduate program, as well as outline your stipend. In addition, you may also need to have a GTA, so a graduate teaching assistantship, or a graduate research assistantship. And again, these vary by department. So with a GTA, this involves some sort of teaching. So you may be responsible for running a lab of undergrads. You may be responsible for designing part of the curriculum or teaching part of a course. It really depends on your supervisor and what their teaching role is. You can also pursue different GRA opportunities. So these are a little bit more broad, but they may include doing library research, data management. Again, really depends on the type of GRA that you're applying to. And so when you're going and looking for different graduate opportunities and interviewing, it's definitely worth asking what kinds of contracts that you're expected to hold as part of your graduate program. So another thing that you can do alongside your graduate studies is an internship. So the Graduate Student Internship Program is a program that's offered by the U of A for graduate students to provide you working opportunities that are flexible and relatively high paying. So typically the pay is about $25 an hour, although this might vary a little bit depending on the internship. And there's a number of hours that you can use towards your internship. So this is a great opportunity to earn money outside of your stipend, as well as make connections within different companies and organizations that you might be interested in working with after. The only caveat with the GSIP is that you do need permission from your supervisor to do this opportunity outside of your graduate studies. So if this is something you're interested in, it's definitely worth bringing up to potential supervisors that you're talking to. Okay, so the match program is a WICRI-funded program. So it's a really great way to try out different labs before you commit to choosing one to do your master's. So if you're not sure what kind of research, what lab you want to be a part of, this is a good way to try out a few first. So you can try out different types of basic science, clinical, epidemiological, and health services research in the departments of medical genetics, pediatrics, obstetrics, and gynecology. So how this works is you apply to the match program, And then you rotate through 3 different labs over a few months before choosing the one that you either are most interested in or the one that suits you best. And this is also a scholarship program, so it provides partial funding for your first few years. Okay, so the MD PhD program is also one that we've asked about a little bit. So this is a program that allows you to obtain both an MD and a PhD degree, so you become a doctor. And so one important thing to note about this program at the U of A is that the U of A only considers those that are already admitted to the MD program. So it's only once you're in the MD program that you can apply to do an MD PhD. So here you would do your first 2 years of MD, then complete your PhD, then come back and finish your MD. So it's a bit of a long haul, but it's really great if you're looking for a career as clinician scientist, so where you have a clinical practice as well as a research laboratory. Okay, so the last thing that I'll touch on briefly are different exchange and visiting graduate student programs. So as Holly mentioned, as part of almost every graduate program, you have the opportunity to go to travel to conferences, different seminars. But if you want to do a longer stay, there are also a lot of opportunities you can do within that. So the University of Alberta has a really great portal called the Go Abroad portal that talks about all these different types of opportunities, as well as lists all the open opportunities that you can apply to. So there are simple exchanges where you just take a course at another university. This can be for a semester, an entire year. You can do an internship. So this is where you do a few months working at a company or an organization. So like the GSIP, this is really great if you want to gain working experience while getting your master's or PhD, and can really help you make connections with companies that you might want to work with after. You can also do summer programs or short-term studies. So these typically are a few weeks to the full 4 months of the summer, and can include either coursework or fieldwork. And oftentimes certain faculties will offer their own exchange programs where you have the opportunity to go and do fieldwork or coursework outside of the university. Okay, so we'll pause now for questions. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. And if there aren't any questions, we can also wait and save it to the end as well. Holly, are you able to see the chat? I'm just having trouble bringing it up.
Yeah, so we have a question here from Anna about the match program, and they're asking when the typical deadline is for applications. And a secondary question from Annie about, are we able to share the slides? And we can share a recording afterwards to people who are registered, and that will go out with an evaluation of the workshop and a list of some student openings. But we'll go back to the match program. Typical deadlines. Do you know, Adrian, when the typical deadline is?
Yeah, so let's hold this question to the panel because Carrie Goodkey went through the match program, so might have a better idea of when those deadlines are. So yeah, let's just hold that till we get to the graduate panel.
Sure. And then we also have a question here about what are some ways to get research experience prior to grad school? That's a really great question. So I can offer some of my thoughts here, and then Adrian, if you have any, we can also let our panel speak to that perhaps when they share a little bit more about their experiences. So some good ways of getting research experience. There are a few kind of options that you might want to look at. One thing that I think people tend to overlook, first of all, are research courses. So it might be mandatory in your undergraduate program anyway to take a research course or something on research methods. And so even though you might not be doing original research or you might not be going through the whole research process, I think sometimes it's very underrated, the amount of experience and kind of knowledge you get from that. And so oftentimes I've heard from undergrads or some of my colleagues as well, they feel they don't have a lot of research experience. But first I want to start off with, if you've taken any of those courses, or even if you've started to work on papers and stuff through undergrad, you have a little bit of experience, and you're more than welcome to talk about that in a grad application. So maybe there was a topic you really liked, or you can talk about some of the things that you really enjoyed from those courses. Outside of coursework, there are a few ways that you can look into getting some more experience. You can look for research assistant opportunities, and those are sometimes advertised through the Career Center, for example. Sometimes they'll be advertised through specific departments. So you can always feel free to contact a department or perhaps certain faculty members, just asking if they have any opportunities available. And I also have heard of people getting volunteer research experience as well. So sometimes I know within my lab, at least, we have several research volunteers, and they just contribute maybe like an hour or two every week to be able to just get a little bit of research experience. And that can be stuff like helping out with lit reviews, even just kind of talking about and designing surveys, just little things like that, that really do add up. Adrienne, anything else to add to getting research experience prior to grad school?
No, not much to add, just to add on to the volunteer. That's how our longest standing undergrad got into our lab, was just by saying, hey, I don't know what research is, but I kind of want to find out. So she started just by volunteering when she could, and that led to, doing research courses and summer studentships, and now she's in grad school. So it's a really great way to get your feet wet if you're not too sure but don't want to commit to a research course.
Yeah, and I will just add there as well about the summer studentship. So WICRI does offer a summer studentship program, and I believe the deadline is sometime in January, or it's coming up soon. So that can be something as well that you might want to consider, and that gives you experience over the summer months where you are paired up with someone who is a faculty member through WICRI, and you're getting some experience that way. And there's lots of supports through WICRI, through kind of professional development opportunities and the opportunity to present your research to your colleagues and other students. So that's also a really great way of getting that research experience, and even just seeing if you like research, because there's so many different types of research that it's good to kind of get your feet wet and look at those different opportunities. And then let's see, we have some few other questions. So can you talk a little bit more about the program scholarships in public health? So there's a public health distinction scholarship and public health innovation. Yeah, so I would just say I can speak a little bit to this question since I am in public health. And it might be applicable to other programs as well, that some programs do offer scholarships that are specific to students who are applying or who are already in graduate programs within that department. And there can be differences in eligibility. So that's the main thing. So sometimes there are scholarships or opportunities for people who are just entering a program, and those are typically called recruitment scholarships. Sometimes there are public health or other program excellence scholarships or distinction scholarships, and those tend to be for students who are already in the program. They might have completed a year and their GPA is really good, or they're doing some really great, making really great progress on their research, and so they might be awarded one of those scholarships. And then there can also be what's called completion scholarships, and some programs offer this as well. And it's for students who are in their last year and they just kind of need the extra push or funding to help them finish off their thesis. And so it's not just public health who offers that type of scholarship, many programs do. And I think it just points out that there are many funding opportunities throughout graduate programs. You don't necessarily need to panic that the only funding opportunities are when you apply. There's many opportunities throughout the program that you can be considered for. And then final question here in the chat, is it going to be difficult to get acceptance to a master's program with just a regular bachelor's degree, not honors? Adrienne, would you like to talk about that?
Sure. In my experience, no. I did not have an honors or specialization program and didn't have any trouble finding a degree or finding a master's program. I think it's more dependent on your GPA and your experience. So I think in our lab, we do have some honors, we have some specialization, we have some people that just had a regular bachelor's degree. So it really depends on GPA, that you actually have the GPA that meets the requirements of the program, and as well as the experience that you bring. So if you've taken courses that are relevant, if you have research experience that's relevant, or if you can really sell yourself in a way that encourages the prof to want to hire you over somebody else. So maybe it might be more difficult, but I would say in my experience, the experience of people in my lab, no, it's not. It's more about who you are and what you bring to the table versus on the type of degree that you get.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Adrian. I also don't have a bachelor's degree with honors. It was just a bachelor's degree. And I didn't have any problems of applying or getting accepted to a master's program and then a PhD program afterwards. Again, it's, as Adrian really nicely put it, it's a lot about who you are as a person and what you can bring to the group. So how you can support other students in the lab, how you complement the supervisor's work. And a lot of times it's not just about what's on paper. And so that's why making those connections with supervisors early on and being able to chat with them or other students can be really important, because they get to know you and can kind of ascertain a little bit better what type of skill set you have and how you might be able to do just as well in a master's program, even if you don't have an honors degree.
And just one more comment on that, and then we can go to the panel. Even if you don't, say you apply to a program but don't have the GPA, you can get a supervisor to vouch for you, and it is possible to get an acceptance to a master's program without meeting the GPA. There are a lot of stipulations with this, and not every prof will do it, but I have seen it happen before. So if you really want to do a program, if you have a connection with a prof, but don't have the GPA, still, enter that conversation and see if it might be possible to get an acceptance if that's something that you really want to do. Okay, well, thank you everyone for the questions. And if you have any more questions throughout, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them at the end. Okay, so now I'm happy to introduce our graduate panel. So we have 4 graduate students today you can ask questions to. So just give a brief introduction and then I'll let everyone introduce themselves and what kind of research that they do. So today we have Alexa Thompson, who's a 4th-year PhD candidate in the Department of Laboratory Medicine. We have Keaton Tiernan, who's a 2nd-year master's student in the School of Public Health. Kara Goodkey, who's a 3rd-year PhD student in the Department of Medical Genetics. And Robert Weenie, who's a 1st-year PhD student in the Department of Psychiatry. So I'll just stop sharing so we can see everyone's faces. Perfect. Hi, everyone. So if you just want to go around and maybe say a sentence or two about what you do in the lab, maybe starting with Alexa.
Sure, thanks, Adrienne. So I'm a 4th-year PhD candidate in the Department of Laboratory Medicine and Pathology. I actually started out in a master's program and then took the fast track route into my PhD. And my actual program focuses on health services research, looking at programs that can improve the access to healthcare services for pregnant and marginalized patients infected with hepatitis C virus in Alberta.
Great, thanks, Alexa. And to Keaton next.
Yeah, hello, everyone. I am a 2nd-year MSc student in the School of Public Health. I finished my degree in kinesiology at the University of Victoria, where I did some honors research, and through that work and experience, I found my way into Kate Story's lab, working with Indigenous youth and mentorship. So my research really falls under the 5th pillar of CIHR, population, social, and cultural impacts on health. I think that's everything. Did I hit everything?
Perfect. Thank you, Keaton. Kara?
Hi, everybody. My name is Kara Goodkey, and I'm a 3rd-year PhD student in the Department of Medical Genetics. I did my bachelor's at the U of A, and I got a bachelor's degree in science with a specialization in molecular genetics. And so through all of that research courses and summer studentships that I did, throughout my undergraduate, I found the lab that I'm currently in, and I originally applied as a master's student. Did my master's for 2 years and chose to upgrade my degree to a PhD. So I'm just starting, having completed that upgrading process. My research focuses on a very rare neurodevelopmental disease, and I use a mouse model to study how this gene causes changes in the brain structure and other phenotypes seen in patients.
Awesome. Thanks, Kara. And Rob?
Good afternoon, folks. My name is Rob McQueenie. I'm a first-year PhD student in the Department of Psychiatry. I have a bachelor's degree in education from a little while ago. I did about 5 years of high school education, five years of high school teaching, before I went back to school and tried to kind of wiggle my way into a graduate program that I thought suited me a lot better. Most of those years of teaching, I had my nose buried pretty deep into neuroscience textbooks just for the fun of it. So I do have kind of an interesting kind of, I guess, backdoor approach into my PhD program. I started in the master's program and eventually was able to coalesce into the PhD. But I work primarily in mental health outcomes and mental health service provision within schools for children and adolescents.
Perfect. Thank you, Rob. So yeah, we can open up to questions now. So if you have a question, please either raise your hand or put it in the chat, and we can go through that way. Maybe to start off, though, I'll pass to Kara to answer the question about the match program. I'm not sure if you can offer any tips of guidelines or applications.
For sure. So yeah, so I forgot to mention, I did go through the match program when I started my master's. And so they do have all the information on the website. If you just look up U Alberta Match, they've got all the information and application stuff that you need for prospective students. Just pulling it up, I found that they have 2 intakes per year. So you can apply for either the fall semester or the winter semester, and that would be when you'd start your program. And so the application deadlines are October 1st to start in the winter semester and May 1st to start in the fall semester. And so I've had people so I went into it kind of knowing what area and what labs that I wanted to focus on, but I've known people in the match program that came in just going, I want to study research that affects women and children. And they ended up looking at different labs in many different departments because they kind of focus on those top 3 departments. You have medical genetics and then obstetrics and gynecology. And so they ended up trying a lab in every department and then picked the one that they found worked the best. For myself, I kind of stayed focused in medical genetics because I knew genetics was what I was passionate about. But it's a very good program. If you're kind of unsure and you don't really have a supervisor lined up, you get to try a bunch of different lab environments, a bunch of different topics. It can be either wet lab or dry lab focused. I ended up choosing a lot of the wet lab focused labs because I really like the bench work. But there are opportunities for both dry and wet lab opportunities.
Awesome. Thanks, Kara. And if any other panel members have information about the match program, feel free to share. But if not, maybe we can go. We have a list of pre-submitted questions as well that we can go through.
Yeah, I was just thinking while we wait for questions to come in, I know one question that was sent in during registration was asking panelists what their favorite part of graduate school is. So I'll throw that out to all of the panelists. What is your favorite part of grad school?
I've already unmuted, so I can start. So for me, my favorite part of grad school, and specifically my project, is the discovery element. I love the fact of finding something new that's never been seen before, never been published, and being the person that gets to ask the question, why is this happening? How is this happening? And then going on that investigative route. I find that very fulfilling. Last year, I found a very novel phenotype in my mouse model, and I was riding that high for months. It was the coolest thing in the world. And it made me so excited to come back to the lab and ask those questions and kind of drive that progress forward. And that's ended up being why I stayed with this project and stayed until my PhD. I couldn't let go of this project and this question that I really wanted to solve and find the answer for.
That's great. I would share a similar love for mass grad school too. Is you get to put on a lot of different hats and wear them. It gives you the space and in the area to do that and to follow your hunches and stuff. And it's cool. I focus more on qualitative dry lab work, and it's really awesome to see that that's also an experience seen in wet labs too. So it's like a pretty universal thing to happen in grad school.
Yeah, and I'll tack onto that just with, I guess, a bit more of a holistic sort of summary of that. My favorite part of grad school is being able to just follow my intuition with the thing that I love to do. You know, I come from a background where I was a school teacher. I loved maybe 30% of that job. I liked 30% of that job, and I outright despised the remaining 40% of that job. And the entire time I was teaching, I always had this pull into neuroscience and its implications in mental health and mental disorders, right? I had my nose in a neuroscience book when I was in the lunchroom. I was, finishing my English marking and then going online and, doing self-research. I was meeting with folks who were already in the department to see if I could help out just as a member of the community. And taking the step to actually be a full-fledged member of the department through grad school is affirming. It means that I get to do the only thing that I want to wake up and do, which is go down this deep dark rabbit hole and just nerd out about the stuff that I love, right? So it's a pretty affirming experience if you're in a field that you really are passionate about.
Thanks, Rob. I think my favorite part of grad school, because I do health services research, is when I'm evaluating different programs, I can see almost immediately right away when I'm doing my evaluations how that is affecting patient outcomes. And for me, it's really motivating to continue working on and to see how I can continually try and improve people's experiences navigating the healthcare system to get access to testing and treatment for hepatitis. And for me, I have a very personal stake in that, as I've had loved ones in my personal life that have been diagnosed with chronic hepatitis. So knowing that I'm improving patient outcomes for the general public, but also that those things are going to improve outcomes for people that also really matter to me is something that continuously motivates me and makes me super happy working on the project that I am.
Great, thank you, everyone. And we also have another question that's come up in the chat. So someone's asking if the match program is available to international students, and also if there are funding opportunities available for international students. And from what I can tell, the match program is available to any student. And I'm going to send just a link in the chat. It's from FGSR, and it's a link to all information about international student funding. So I'll send that, and I'll really encourage people to explore the FGSR page if you're interested in funding for Canadian students or international students.
I can also send the link that just has all the information for the match program. And yes, it is open for international students. There's international as well as Canadian applicant links that you can look through, and a little bit more information just on the basis of the program.
Perfect. And here's another pre-submitted question that I always wondered in undergrad. What does a day in a life look like for you as a grad student?
Guess I can start again. So I tend to be in the lab, like physically in the lab, at least 4 days a week. And so my day is kind of broken down between doing experiments, analyzing my data, and then putting all that data together in a cohesive, presentable manner. And scattered in throughout there are like seminars and conferences and stuff, but mainly my lab personally, we have very flexible working hours. So we tend to come in when we need to come in, and sometimes that includes weekends, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it's evenings, but you come in when you need to for your experiment, because we are very driven by our mice and when our mice are ready and when they decide to give birth or when they reach the correct age. So we're very flexible in that sense, but you are dependent on their schedule. So I tend to do a lot of wet lab work. So there's quite a few bench work experiments. And then the other side of that, of course, is the analysis. So for a typical day, it's pretty similar of like 9 to 5. I try and keep fairly reasonable working hours, but start or at least complete 1 or 2 experiments and then go through and analyze. And the analysis tends to take a little bit longer than running the actual experiment, but you do get a lot of really interesting results from it. And it's very fulfilling in that way to see your project and your experiment kind of pan out and work.
Yeah, I guess my day is going to be a little bit different than the other grad students on this panel because I don't work in a lab, right? My role is highly tied to Alberta Health Services and the dispersion of health resources and other things, right? So we have a lot of staff on our team who go into schools who actually implement these resources, implement these things at the school-based level in order to, collect data and see how the work we're doing is actually changing mental health outcomes in kids. So my day is comprised of a lot of meetings. My day is comprised of a lot of reading and a lot of writing. And, there's this phenomenon called screen brain, where at the end of the day, if you turn off your computer and close your eyes, you're laying down in bed and you close your eyes and you see lines of text, imprinted behind your eyelids. You've done your fair share of reading and writing for the day. So it's for me, it's highly variable, but I get to interface with a lot of stakeholders from public institutions most days of the week.
Mine is actually more similar to Rob's than it is to Kara's, except the difference is I'm in a lab, but my lab is in the University of Alberta Hospital. So I still go into a lab every day, but mine is very similar in which I continue to engage with stakeholders. I'm in a lot of meetings throughout the day. And then one thing that I also think is important to highlight is part of my grad school role also includes the extracurriculars that I do. So sprinkled in throughout my day, on top of my grad research, I'm also involved in extracurriculars. So I usually have 1 to 2 meetings a week involved in different extracurriculars. And then my PhD project is also linked to a nonprofit that I founded called the Alberta Hepatitis Elimination Network. And so I also engage with stakeholders during my PhD project for my nonprofit at the same time. So kind of a little bit of everything going on.
Yeah, I would also say mine's not too dissimilar from everyone else's. It's a little bit of everything all at once. I try to stick to a pretty good 9 to 5 schedule, and that's not always realistic, but my work involves a lot of community-based participatory setting up. So I'm in meetings a lot with community partners, and sometimes once a month I get to go into community and work with community partners, which is what kind of gets me through to the next month. And also sprinkled out through all of that is my extracurricular activities also. And I try to stay active and maintain my hobbies outside of all of that too. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's too dissimilar, or it is quite different from undergrad work. There's a lot more freedom and it's a lot more self-driven, less self-scheduled, but there's still like stuff to do for sure.
Thanks, everyone. We have another question in the chat, again, about the match program. So I think a lot of people are finding this very interesting, which is great. So the question, I'm going to default to Kara to answer this, our resident match expert here. In regards to the match program, does the rotation happen between 3 specific labs? This person noticed there was a list provided on the website of more than 3 labs. So how does that, I guess, work? Do you get to provide a preference of your top 3 labs, or are there 3 labs that everyone has to rotate through?
So it's more along lines with the first option. So they have a huge list from all 3 departments. So you end up, when you submit your application, you do submit, like, I think it's 3 or 4 labs that you would prefer to work in, and they try and accommodate you as best as possible. And so in my case, I ended up doing 3 labs that were all strictly in medical genetics, because I knew I wanted to be in medical genetics and do genetics research. But again, like I said before, there are people that selected 1 lab from every department. So they did 1 medical genetics rotation, and then they did a pediatrics rotation, and they did an obstetrics rotation. And so it's kind of there to give you that opportunity to try different labs and different supervisors. And that's part of the reason I really like this program, is you get this opportunity to find, first of all, different research topics, and then different lab environments, because I find the lab environment plays a big role in how well you do in your program. So different supervisors have different methods of managing a lab and managing students. And so you want to find one that works really good for you. So even if you don't do the match program and you're just going through a normal supervisor interviews, I highly encourage that if you're doing these interviews to ask questions of the current students. How do these PIs manage their lab? How involved are they in the research? And see if you can find something that fits you there. And so the match program does allow you to do that. You get about 1 month in each lab from September to about middle of December. And then you select which one you want. And assuming the PI wants to take you on as well, then you can start in January with your research there.
Great, thank you. And I think that might be a good segue into another question we received, which was, how did you find your supervisor? So that seems to be a question a lot of people want to know. Like, did you have to contact them yourself? Was it someone you previously worked with? So we'll open that up to the panel. How did you find your current supervisor?
So mine's more of a non-traditional route because I actually did undergraduate research. I did the biomedical research certificate in my undergrad in 3 different labs, and I ended up doing grad school in a 4th completely different lab on a completely different topic. So I think having the previous experience really drove me to know what topic I wanted to do. And because I knew the area that I wanted to research, I honestly just went to the U of A website and typed in hepatitis C, prenatal, marginalized people, and then looked at the different professors that came up that were doing research in that area, decided which one, whose research project aligned closest with my values. And then I honestly just cold emailed them to find out if they were accepting grad students. And luckily she was. So it ended up working out really great for me. I think the cold emailing route is actually quite common for undergraduate students with no research experience, but just know that it's also common for people who do have research experience, and that you can be quite successful going that route, even though it tends to be the scarier one.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I think so many of us think that we have this highly impractical, non-traditional route to finding our supervisors in this, totally weird backwards trajectory, when we seem to all have this common thread of we did it our own way, we found a way, or we made one. This was kind of my situation as well. I was a teacher. I was interested in this. The profiles of professors and their research on the U of A website, at least in my department, is borderline a gross invasion of their privacy, because it lays out everything that they do and everything that they're interested in. So you're really able to kind of pare down who you might vibe with in terms of your research interests, in terms of personalities, in terms of all of this stuff. And I cold called people. I sent so many cold emails to people in the Department of Psychiatry as a teacher with absolutely no official background in neuroscience, in psychiatry, in mental health provision, in mental health prevention, et cetera, right? And through some other steps, at least in my journey of really taking steps to prove myself and show that I had what it takes, which took years for me, I was able to stick around long enough that somebody had an opening, and I had done enough things relevant to them that they said, okay, you can help out. But there really isn't a one size fits all approach to finding a supervisor, at least from the people that I've talked to in my program.
Yeah, so my way was slightly different. I ended up doing the research certificate in science during my undergrad, as well as about 2 summer studentship programs. So I ended up finding my lab through one of the summer studentship programs, and then that turned into a Bio 499, which is a full year undergraduate honors research thesis. And then that turned into a final summer studentship, and then I started match program, kind of going in knowing I really wanted this lab, but wanted to try a couple others as well, and ended up picking that lab that I'd already been in for about 1.5 years there. And so mine, I didn't end up going through any of that cold emailing or cold calling for professors. I kind of found a lab that I really liked, and I ended up just switching my project within the lab from one topic to another, but stayed within the same lab environment there.
Yeah, I had a fairly similar experience to Rob in that it was a lot of cold calling. I completed my degree at the University of Victoria in BC, and there I fell into but I went into honors work, and I was doing a lot of work with academic success, cell phone use, and mental health. And I was kept on reading these papers, and my current supervisor's name started popping up a lot. And I looked into her work, and I found that it really resonated at the time in my honors. I was doing a lot more of like epidemiology, quantitative work, and I wanted to move into more of like a narrative, qualitative field. And that's how I ended up here. So I traded warm, balmy winters for nice, cool, and snowy ones, I guess.
Yeah, and I think what you all kind of touched on is that you don't have to do what you did in undergrad for graduate studies. So even if you did research in undergrad and didn't love it, you don't have to do the same thing for graduate work. You can do something completely different if you want. And that kind of leads into the next question from the chat, which is, how much from your undergrad degree do you use in grad school? And does your undergrad degree have to be directly linked to your master's and PhD? So I guess I'll kind of pass this back to the panel.
So I did my undergrad here at the U of A as well. I actually did a specialization degree in cell biology. So I was very interested in things on a molecular level. I started out doing very tedious wet lab research, looking at cellular mechanisms on a very, very small scale. And now I'm doing my PhD in epidemiology and healthcare services research on a population scale. So pretty much the complete opposite. So I think the answer is no, your undergrad does not have to be directly linked to your graduate program. And honestly, like I don't use a ton from the majority of my courses from my undergrad, but I do use a lot of the information from the core courses that drove me to my research area at the moment. So for me, that was some of my immunology and virology courses that I took in my later years. But if you were to ask me anything about intro chem or organic chemistry for my first couple of years, I couldn't tell you anything other than I got the prereq for it and was able to take courses in my future year.
And I ended up following more of a little different path in that my undergraduate degree relates directly to my graduate degree. So I got undergraduate bachelor's of science, specialization in molecular genetics, and now my PhD's in medical genetics. So there is quite a bit of knowledge transference, but I'm really surprised, especially like the first couple of years, how much I learned on the job. So in grad school, like the stuff relevant to my project was not always stuff that was covered in undergrad. So I learned a lot of it as we went through. You end up reading a ton of papers. There's a lot of seminar discussions, and that all helps you kind of bring you up to that level in your field. And so I find what I use more in my graduate degree, instead of the knowledge that I learned, is more of the skills, how to think about these questions, how to answer, what techniques to use. Lots of the techniques that I learned in my undergraduate research courses and summer studentships, a lot of those ended up being more transferable than the knowledge learned. So it's more of that aspect of how to answer questions, how to ask the right question, which is a big one, and then how to interpret your results. And so that's kind of applicable for most undergraduate degrees, especially in terms of science. If you take any science undergraduate degree and move it to a graduate degree, those skills are all very transferable.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I mean, I think in terms of the toolkit that an undergraduate degree equips you with, in terms of, the two kind of big picture purposes of an undergrad degree, A, getting a job in a vocational field, education, nursing, law, etc., or B, giving you a basic foundation to be able to complete graduate studies or pursue academia further on. I think that second use is something that we can probably all attest to using from our undergraduate, just that not basic, but just that foundational level kind of skill base to be able to complete our work at a high degree and be able to ask the right questions, form linkages, really understand the bedrock of academia so that we don't completely fall on our face when we enter grad school, right? In terms of, does your undergrad degree have to be directly linked to your master's/PhD? I think that it should be in some capacity linked to where you start. You know, oftentimes when you begin your research or your grad school journey, you might start in one place and it might snowball, or it might kind of take a couple of different turns because we don't know how research disseminates. We don't know what knowledge comes from the literature and how that's going to shape our journey, right? So in terms of getting yourself into grad school, you should be able to display some linkage, at least in my opinion, between what you garnered in your undergrad degree and where you want to take it, even if where you want to take it is in a completely different faculty from what you took your undergrad in.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I think everyone else has done a very great job at hitting the nail on the head. And I think one thing to keep in mind is you're never like stuck in the decision you made when you're 17 or when you first started undergrad. And there are like, I have a kinesiology degree. A lot of my colleagues who finished with a kinesiology degree, a lot of them went into physio, some went into med school. I went into public health, others went into physiology or even microbiology. So, and I think that that's kind of similar in other programs too, is like there's a lot of transferability, and you might not know it, but it is there, and there's a lot of different ways you can spin any bachelor's degree.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what Adrian was saying about selling yourself to your potential supervisor. So in those interviews, it's really important to draw on any sort of linked skill that you can bring into the lab. And sometimes it's also important to draw on what's different that makes you stand out from lots of applicants. There's an increasing pressure and focus in science specifically on this interdisciplinary aspect. So coming at a question from a completely opposite angle than what's traditionally used in the field can be very interesting and very sought after in candidates for a graduate program.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much to our graduate panelists. That was all really great. And I think I myself learned a lot about the match program, so thank you all for that. So we'll switch now to the research blitz. So we have at least one prof here to advertise an open position in their lab. Oh, perfect. Dr. Lahi. So yeah, if you want to just give a little pitch about your lab and the open position that you have.
Well, can I share? I have 5 slides to share it. I don't know.
I think you should be able to share now. You were just made as co-host.
Okay, yeah. Sorry. It doesn't respond to share. Well, I don't know.
Okay, I just made it so all participants can, so maybe give it another shot.
No, it does not even respond to the. It's just the share button is inactive on my side.
I'm not sure what that issue could be, but if you would like to share those slides, like email them to one of us, we'd be happy to share them. If you're allowing us to share them.
Yeah, no, that's very easy. Okay, I should have done that.
So would you like to say a few words, or would you like us just to include your slide in the email that we send out?
Yeah, I am sending the.
Perfect.
emailing you guys.
While we're waiting, are there any other faculty members who are here that wanted to share anything about looking for a grad student?
Okay, you might. Oh my goodness. So now, this is the worst thing to happen. Yeah, I tried to send it with my mail. It says that this size doesn't allow, so I have to do it with the Gmail.
No problem. Yeah, and we're happy to send them out. We'll also be sending out a list of other descriptions of lab opportunities for grad students that we received from some WICRI members. So for people who are still on the call and for other registrants who might have had to leave early, please expect to receive an email from Adrian and I, and we will include a link to the recording of this so you can watch it back, and perhaps you want to write some tips down. We'll also send out that list of openings, the slides as well from Dr. Elahi, and then there'll also be a feedback survey because this is our first time doing Grad School 101. So we'd love to hear feedback on what you liked about it and what we can improve for next time.
So did you get the email or?
I'm just looking now.
Nothing's come through on my end.
Here, I'll see if I can share this quickly. Okay. So I have it here. I'll just go ahead and share. Okay.
Thank you very much. So sorry about the delay and technical problem. So I am in a department which is a bit unheard of. So you don't expect to have immunologists in dentistry, but I'm an immunologist at the School of Dentistry. If you go to the second slide,
Is the second slide coming through for you?
It still shows the first slide for me, Adrian.
Okay.
So anyway, to save the time, so my lab is very diverse. You will see in the second slide. So my lab works in cancer, immunology, immunotherapy. We do work on IVD, and one portion of my lab is on the neonatal immune system, which is relevant to VCARE mandate. And also my lab works on HIV. And the past couple of years, we have started working on SARS-CoV-2 pathogenesis. And yeah, as you can see, it's very diverse. And another area which is interest of my lab is the microbiome. So if I go in the third slide in terms of, project that might be interested for potential graduate student, one is the interaction of the microbiome with immune cells. So we all know that the microbiome is very essential in terms of educating the immune system at the earliest stage of life. So newborns are coming out from a very clean environment, and then they get exposed to billions of germs in a matter of minutes. And how the immune system tolerates them, how the immune system responds to them, those are critical questions that we need to address. And I am very interested to understand the crosstalk between the immune cells and the microbiome, and especially the interaction between the impact of the microbiome on the enteric nervous system and how this interaction impacts the central nervous system. So this is a very important one of the area of research in my lab. Another area of research is the IBD, especially in the neonatal and young children. So the fourth slide, which is that we have done lots of studies on IBDs, especially we have longitudinal studies on mothers with IBD. We collect samples from them pre-conception, during pregnancy, and postpartum. And we have collected fecal samples, meconium, breast milk, and we have shown that the milk component of the mothers with IBD is different than healthy mothers. So there are some inflammatory markers. We have identified some metabolites that they have been published. You can look them up. And so we are very interested to see that whether the milk from IBD mothers predisposes their newborns to IBD or other inflammatory conditions. So these are one of the area of research interest in my lab. And if we go to the next slide, this is something that you have heard a lot, that sex is very important, like male versus female. So sex is a variable factor which impacts the immune cells. And this is just an example. I want to show you that this is just looking at microbiome in female versus male. You can see that at 3-day-old, the microbiome is different. You see lots of green in the female versus lots of blue in the male. So it shows that even at earliest stage of life, at 3-day-old, males and females are different. But this is something that we have a special interest to see, that how this microbiome can influence the immune system of the male versus female. So this is the kind of one of area of research. And finally, another thing which is very interesting area of research in my lab is breast cancer. So we all know that breast cancer is one of the most common cancer types in females globally and even in Canada. So now understanding how these breast cancer cells get released from the tumor site, and then they move to the body to different locations, and they start to kind of do the metastasis and then establish in another area. So if you just imagine that these breast cancer cells like seeds, what is the mechanism they get released, and why they go to the, for example, bone, to the brain, to the lung, specific niches. So what is the soil, the component in those areas that allow those seeds, those tumor cells get established? So we have very important, very novel research. We have identified very specific cell types that they are allowing these cancer cells to get released. And then they help them to get established in other areas of body in different niches. So these kind of examples were some of the things that are related to the women and children in my lab. So it was a great pleasure to share it with you guys. And if you are interested to contact me via email, you can look my labs up online. We have published different papers in different areas of research. And in terms of my style, I am a very passionate scientist. I am in my lab at least 80 hours a week, and I have an open door policy. So that's been my, right now is closed because of the meeting, but my office door is open and my student, my trainees can interrupt me anytime, any day, so even weekends. So if you have any interest in this area of research and my lab, I'm happy to chat with you further via emails or in person. Thank you so much for your interest, and I think this is a great way to kind of expose a new generation of scientists to researchers, and this was my first experience. So hopefully in the future I will do this, and I appreciate the Bakery for providing this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming and sharing the opportunities in your lab. I had no idea that that kind of research was being done at the U of A. It's so fascinating. So thank you for coming to share that. And we will include your contact info in the email that we send out if anybody here is interested in contacting you. Yeah, thanks again for coming.
Thank you very much, everybody. Bye.
All right, and so that wraps up Grad School 101. We want to thank everyone for attending. And again, please watch out for an email from WICRI with some more resources that we shared today, including a link to the recording, a list of grad school openings and contact information, and a feedback survey. And we'd be really appreciative if you could send us some feedback about how you experienced the workshop today. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.